Thank you. I'd like to first thank you all for staying here, actually, because we're closing out the 36th Congress, and it's amazing to see how many folks are here to close it out. So a round of applause to you. Thank you. This is really special. I'd like to thank France and her incredible team of organizers that's made this happen. My name is Jefferson, and I'm proud to be from Chicago, but actually I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. So this is like a strange, serendipitous connection here. What I want to encourage you to do is 4 years from now, when you go to Washington, D.C., please don't stay in that mall area. And you know what I'm talking about if you've been to D.C. before. I want to encourage you to go and explore the neighborhoods. Steve Nelson can tell you a little bit about some of the beauty and the incredible nature of the DC neighborhoods and how diverse it is. But if you stay in that mall center, you're not going to get the full Washington, D.C. experience. I mean, from being from that area, when people say, oh, D.C. is this or D.C. is that, no, you don't know D.C. unless you visited Southeast Washington or until you go to neighborhoods like Logan Square or Logan Circle. So I'm excited, and people are really nice. Just make sure that you don't take out your wallet. But in actuality, I think it's really a beautiful place, and I'm so proud that the next conference is going to be there. So I've been an artist, a theater practitioner for over 30 years, and you might have heard the term imposter syndrome. Well, I am the imposter today, and that is absolutely okay. We can talk a little bit about that later. But let's begin with this title, Black to the Future. Okay, it's cute. I couldn't resist. Let's start with the idea that artists travel with time. Artists use time. And we are all arguably time-based artists, and that's true. But some could say time travel is some superpower. We ask artists in society to create, perform the supernatural all the time, so it's not a stretch to consider the reality that we have the gift, the ability to travel time. Let me forward this. That's me. See, I'm trying to be funny, but nobody's laughing. Maybe it's an American humor thing. This is me in a mercury capsule suit. Some could say that it is a sort of superpower, but there's a lot of fictional cliches, and I want to talk about some of the cliches of time travel and regarding to traversing time and space. Here are a few. One, when you go back in time or travel forward, it's a linear experience, that we're jumping back into a concrete and constructed past. And that's not true. You can travel in time for thousandths of a second, for a moment. I mean, you put on your grandmother's old shoes, you can travel. Sometimes it's the touch, the smell, the sound. It doesn't have to be something in which, you have to be necessarily in a specific constructed space. As a matter of fact, I think most time travel isn't that way. It's not linear. Another popular cliche is the concept from the 1985 movie Back to the Future that we can warp our lives by altering the past. And actually, there may be some truth in this. But again, the presentation of fiction always seems to flatten the multitude of ripples that happen in time travel. For example, there might be thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of things that change when you go back into time and space. And finally, probably one of the biggest myths is only white people have the ability to do this. I think there was one black character in that movie, the mayor, if you remember. I think there's a lot more to our understanding of time than what we see fictionalized. And actually, when we get down to it, for centuries, some people have considered time travel to be relevant to those who had, similar to the Tom Wolfe book from the 1960s, those who had the right stuff to travel in time and space, which are usually privileged people. So for a century, we thought this was a white man's game, but it's not. And truly certain, we have more to gain in this exploration of the past. Certain people haven't had the luxury to be considered in the future. I could go into details on how people of color have been omitted from these representations. Think about how many time narratives in which the presence of black and brown bodies have been eliminated. You don't have to go far into science fiction narratives, and there are a lot of them, in which black people just aren't present. We, people of color, have to insert ourselves in these narratives and create our own histories. We have to insert ourselves in narratives and create our own histories. We're playing a vital role in challenging these perceptions through this absence. Okay, I want to show you this. I love Romare Bearden. I hope everyone is a fan. But this is titled Rocket to the Moon. And you see this triangulation of individuals at the bottom two-thirds of the composition. And can you tell what they're doing? They're smoking. They're lighting up. They're transcending, possibly. They're altering themselves. And they're leading into this, into space and this triangulation that Bearden brilliantly brought together by narrowing these buildings. And it leads us right to this red light, and it stops us. And then above that, we look at this rocket that's flying into space. And if you've ever been somewhere you didn't want to be, and you saw a plane flying by, then maybe you could understand maybe some of the feelings he's eliciting here, which is that there's an escapism that's present here, and it's powerful. I'm also a big fan of Kiefer and his construction of these lead planes, and we'll talk a little bit about alchemy later, but the poppy and the way it's emerging from the presentation I think is brilliant, and we start thinking about vessels for travel through time. And I'm also connected to rust. I think rust is a magical material. It represents a passing of time. It's actually hard to imagine an artist that isn't invested in the endeavor of shifting or bending time of some sort and format. It's not a stretch to understand that we are committed to leaping into the future by using material, technology, and our bodies to create new audience that haven't been born yet. That's our goal as artists. We want to not tap into this audience, we want to tap into your grandkids' audience. We want to be talked about well beyond the next 50 years. From early training, we've been made aware of the powers that we have to transform what we see into beauty. This mystical alchemy was taught to us by our mentors and our mentors' mentors and so forth. And if you've taken a drawing class, that may be one of the first things they tell you to do. They get a pair of old sneakers and they'll put them on a table. They'll put some flowers on the table and they'll say, okay, we want you to make this into something special. We want you to transform this group of objects into something that has perhaps a spiritual quality, or at the very least, something that's beautiful. We have repeatedly proven in our profession that we have the ability to change materials and the world around us by handling, crafting, and expressing what we feel and what we know. But let's take it a step further. If we can acknowledge that artists have these special abilities, then we can embrace that often there are no boundaries in our understanding and the power of our imagination to alter, change, and warp time. So, as the famed hip-hop artist Jay-Z says, let's take it back to the beginning. This wrought iron slave shackle, it is rusted, weathered. It gives us a representation of something that's familiar, but then again, there are elements to this that I'm sure not everybody knows. And I think the reality, a horrible reality, is that African laborers were used to make these shackles. Forced laborers. So this object has a layer of meaning. And it is something that I think about as the connectivity between the object and the individual. And also, this is Brown University. So these things are hidden away in archives and people don't know how to handle them. They don't know how to deal with them. So as artists, we're not timid. We jump into the fray. And how do we do it? How do we travel into time? Well, there's a variety of different ways, and some rituals date back hundreds of years. I love this painting, Before the Parachute. It's 1939, parachutes hadn't even been used for that long, and then there's something kind of mystical about this body floating in space. But if we want to go back to the American tradition, for example, African American ring shouts, these rituals are as much about transformation as they are about moving through time. Our ancestors were forcibly brought to the United States during the transatlantic trade, used dance music as coping mechanisms. The original ring shouts, which you see these participants dancing in, were a mix of rich cultures, traditions, songs, dances from a variety of different communities, a mix designed to create a new existence in the New World, in the violent New World. In Cuba, Trinidad, Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, and Jamaica, descendants of slaves knew they had to foster connections to other places and transport their bodies into new worlds to survive. Why is the ring shout significant? It holds the memories of those who came before. Tamara Williams, a University of North Carolina dance professor, states, practitioners of the ring shout sing and move around in a counterclockwise circle with movement gestures relating to songs and rhythms of the present. The circle represents life energy, infinite cycle, which change in quality but is never broken. The counterclockwise direction in the ring shout tradition honors the ancestors, and since the direction specifically connects beings to an ancestral realm, this may be viewed by some as a way of reversing or traversing time in order to unite with the spirits. This type of connectivity to the divine spirits is rarely found within the linearity of Western spiritual practices. Okay. So if this sounds a little wooey, if this sounds crazy to you Western art historians, I'm not surprised. I think you have to relax a little. You have to, you do. To understand this one, I mean, you have to slow yourself down because maybe the first response to this is to reject it. But you're probably not going to find empirical evidence. You have to believe. Science fiction writer Octavia Butler has led the way for artists, but in particular, I think she's had a special spot for Afrofuturists and black artists in America. She asks us to think differently about the presentation of fiction within a cruel realities of social structures. And in her seminal acclaimed book, Kindred, her protagonist travels through time to not only save herself, but the white rapist that victimizes her to produce her offspring. And that's heavy, right? That's some heavy, heavy business. History is cruel, is dishonest, and it's often Eurocentric, and it must be altered. And the secret is, history can be altered. And the presentation of this can be more truthful being altered than the way it exists now. And that is my work. That's my action. And also, quite frankly, it's your responsibility. We have to think about this. We'll talk about allyship later, but no, I'm not going to be able to do this alone. And I think my artist friends that venture into this work realize that we need historians to write about it because right in our heads it's like this. But somehow you actually help the understanding and the connection to this work. Artists have the gift of sensitivity. We look at things, we make observations, we feel. Okay, so, this is the part where, it's a little, I'm sure it's already different than your presentations, but I'm thinking about, having dinner the other night and this wonderful musician's like, I can't talk about my work, I can't talk about myself. Well, I'm going to talk about myself for a little bit, and I hope you excuse this, but I'm going to talk about how my work relates to this idea of time travel. This is an exhibition shot from my 2016 installation, Onyx Odyssey. From altered billy clubs, police night six used for abuse for centuries, to traffic tape repurposed to create tapestries of intense wear. Like if you take a look, the billy clubs are above the doorway, and then what looked like, a tapestry to a left is actually street markers that are taken off the road and sewn together. So the center work is Monolith, which references the mysterious rectangle from the 2001 Space Odyssey, but inside, it's actually the exact dimensions. Inside, there are hundreds of West African masks contain spirituality within an illuminated space. In my world, black glitter, rust, neon all become mystical materials that allow for transformation, understanding of time. I'm going to focus on the piece to the right of this installation. It's called Mauryan Shadows. It's repurposed church organ pipes from the 19th century. Here it is, that helps us to understand history, transportation of the viewer into a space of empathy and feeling. You know, this is based loosely on the only black knight in King Arthur's court, Mauryan. I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. The audio that is piped through these not so distant relics of these church organ pipes begins to give us an understanding of some of the themes of Mauryan's story. You know, he's a special one. He's the only knight in the court that had a personal mission, which was to find his father. So hot-tempered, Mauryan was known to fight and kill individuals who didn't help him, assist him in this endeavor. He gained entrance into the court by fighting Sir Lancelot in a hand-to-hand combat. The duel was so intense that other knights had to come in and say, wait a second, wait, you guys are too talented to die in this way. He was actually a teenager when this happened, and it sparked my imagination. First of all, I didn't know that there was a black knight in King Arthur's court, and a black knight that was looking for his father. That blew me away. So I think what I want people to do is I want them to look at this and hear the sounds and to begin to think of some of the connectivity. We're gonna. It continues. So material-wise, what we're looking at is a variety of 19th century galvanized steel pipes on raw hardwood floor base of the same period, wired to speakers, projecting an array of sounds produced from early 20th century sacred harp music, galloping horses, sounds of fire, air raid sirens, to connect the spectator to a 13th century tale of a black man looking for his dad, which sadly is very much a 21st century narrative as well. These materials and conversations with themselves is a compression of time and allows for a portal to understanding the human experience in perpetuity. Here he is, this Mauryan. So again, it's having to find the history and figuring out ways of interacting with it. So materials as vehicle. How about this? I'm gonna show you this. I know, I can't help it. Robert Zemeckis, the director and writer of this movie, got it right in his selection of a stainless steel DeLorean as his vehicle for moving through time. It had all the characteristics of everyday, but a sacredness. Perhaps the mission was so personal, Michael J. Fox is busting through time to alter mishaps that led to his erasure. But imagine if the mission was about a revelation of a larger social ill, or if indeed there was not the assimilation going back to 1950s America? What if Fox had to uplift his race and battle the oppressive elements of the black existence in that era? I can't imagine going back in time without some kind of sophisticated weapon or protection. I just can't. I feel like even in my time travels, I'm thinking about how I'm going to make it back. Black time travelers need to be extra cautious in moving through time because of the continuum of violence that has plagued our existence in the world, in particular in the Americas. Black and brown artists recognize this dilemma, for there is so much residual of the past in our daily lives in the present. We've got to be careful, as there are intense consequences for this work, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Personally, I love cars. I always have. This is my first car piece from 2006, which seems to be a journey through a normal car wash in which everything is moving around the sitter, myself. And I'm static. The dynamic framework offers a journey into color. Seemingly, time is at a standstill, and the movement of this deluxe car wash, because the deluxe car wash is where you get the complementary colors, like somebody designed it. So you get purple and yellow and green and red when you get the deluxe car wash. Black artists that are involved in this mundane action quietly get into their thinking. If you've ever been in a car wash, I think it becomes almost a spiritual experience in which you're witnessing your vessel being cleaned, which I think is important in certain neighborhoods. In my next vehicle performance, this is the suds kind of cascading down in this piece. And then later in 2009, this is Lazarus. And Lazarus is a piece where I am seemingly moving something that's supposed to move me, until a band of people, of performers, of people passing by on the street, like move this vessel while I'm in it, and it becomes this idea of a human power. We talk a lot about horsepower with cars, but this is a look into the lack of mobility in community. But at the very end of the piece, we were kind of reflected, and we go right back to the beginning, where you're beginning to question if this community really existed or if this was something that was happening in the mind. And also, I love the old Volvo slogan, which is what the vehicle is a Volvo, the slogan for life. And I think all of this kind of fueled my interest in the work. Later on, in 2018, Sonic Boom delivers the most violent iteration of time travel for me. This design ritual, equipped with a New Orleans second-line brass band, I'm seated in a 1977 Delta 88 Royale two-door that is jacked off the ground by this team of performers that is helping to remove the tires, putting it up on jacks in which it's not grounded and allows for a different kind of transportation. The site, Walter Reed Military Hospital in Washington, D.C., our nation's oldest hospital for veterans, and in this work, I step on the accelerator of the vehicle until the engine dies. The audience hears the car moan and whine and cry painfully until ultimately the car is set ablaze. The car was used as a metaphor for death, service, violence, and context to history. Cars aren't the only vehicles that can be used in time travel. This is Capsule Mothership 2009 on permanent display at the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. Maybe with a little luck it'll be there when you go through, I'm not quite sure. This is a full-scale model of the first American vessel to orbit the planet. And in a sun-raw trajectory, it's at the brink of representing true freedom. The piece is constructed from Baltimore tin, from dilapidated houses, and salvaged wood from the inauguration platform of former President Barack Obama. That's the interior of the structure. This vessel again asks us who has the right stuff to achieve new heights in exploration of discovery. As I mentioned before, I was inspired by Anselm Kiefer's Lead Plains, but his reference to the angel of history just blew me away. as well as the recent emergence of the Liberty 7 capsule, which was sunken after going into space and orbiting and fell into the water and then sank down there and was laying at the bottom of the ocean for 50 years. So rusted and decayed beyond its time. It was a representation of past failure and breakdown, and the idea of bringing it back out of the water, it motivated me to create Capsule. Okay, the second part I want to talk about, and probably the most important, is body as material. Let's get this going. Part of me I love working with objects, and I could continue talking about unconventional and somewhat mundane weathered art materials. But as I mentioned before, what I really want to talk about specifically and unrefutably is dealing with the black body. I spoke about the ring shout earlier, but I think it's important to mention that you only need a body to travel through time. And that's important. I love cars, but you only need yourself. And as much as I think that this is a practical journey, I also think it's a spiritual one. The title of this piece is Afro-Cosmonaut, Alien White Noise, and it's from 2008, in which I travel to 1968 using stock NASA footage from that year and whitening my skin in reference to Buto theater as well as a whiteface minstrelsy. To turn back time to insert myself in a year in which man finally broke free of the Earth's gravitational pull, that MLK was shot and killed after his famed mountaintop speech in which he predicted his own demise hours before, actually. And the video work illustrates the turbulence, explosions, rawness of time travel. Using time-lapsed animation, over 2,000 images were seamed together to build a narrative of intensity, forward and moving, and eventually a collapse, a failure, an epic breakdown, which is sometimes intrinsic with the works of these narratives. So how do you prepare the body for violence of the past? Well, I've really gotten into this idea that you train yourself. I mean, training is one of these things that you prepare yourself for a crazy situation, so when that happens, you know what to do, right? But in slower times, it's really important to think about how you begin that. Harry Houdini, the marvel of the 20th century, an immigrant, a Hungarian Jewish person fleeing European violence, had an uncanny skill of breaking free of any hold. While simultaneously, at the same time that he was creating performances where he's suspended in space, African Americans were being lynched throughout the country. So recently I began to think, well, what if these things could combine? What if there was training to break free of holds? In 2011, in my home state, Matthew Williams was lynched on the county courthouse in Salisbury, Maryland in 1931. 80 years later, I was ready to have contact with Matthew. On the same location at the same time, I inserted myself in this space. He was lynched in a straitjacket, which is the most bizarre thing, but it was fodder for thinking of Houdini in context of breaking that narrative. So after months of training, I learned how to break free from a straitjacket. So it took me longer than I thought, and actually there wasn't a violent mob, but I think the spectacle began to ask, how do you prepare the body or mind for an inevitable conflict? And that's how Black Americans say it. We're gonna get pulled over. This is gonna happen. And when it does, how do we prepare ourselves? Well, you don't have to go very far. This is the Southern Nonviolent Coalition Committee, Coeur d'Alene Committee, and this is training in which the members would close the door and they would practice violence on each other. The theory being that the first time that you were hit hard, you didn't want to get hit hard by a cop, you wanted to get hit hard by somebody who loved you. And I think this gets into the brutality and the mind frame of the individuals that were preparing themselves for a future of violence. But also, I was thinking a lot about Black Panther training, and when I asked professionals, I'm like, how did the Black Panthers train? And I got a variety of responses, and the one that I really I clung to the most was a theatricality, was a uniform, the black beret, the leather coat, the formation, the drill. Black Panthers practice drill. I mean, the idea of moving together in unison can be a really intimidating thing. So in 2019, if we can fast forward now, my largest intervention to date, I worked with a team of performers to create an idea of how to prepare the body and how to go back into time in the sites in which there was violence in the Red Summer of 1919. In 1919 in the United States, white people lost their minds. They killed thousands of innocent and militant blacks that had been trained to fight in World War I. White Americans felt threatened by the idea that World War I was the first time black soldiers were trained in militancy, and they fought abroad. They fought here. And then they came home and they had to face Jim Crow South. And they were like, we're not having it. And so in almost every major city, there was an uprising. And this really, I mean, if you want to talk about, well, where did the civil rights movement begin? Well, every single major conflict produced a generation of combatants. And the Americans are really good at training people how to fight and kill. And when they trained African Americans, I think they bit off more than they could chew. What had changed? You know, what could be done differently? So how do you prepare, if a police officer is shooting at you from behind, how do you keep yourself alive? I worked with veterans from the Persian Gulf War. I worked with former Black Panthers, and I'm like, well, if we're creating a militia, we're creating a group of people that are ready to defend themselves, how do we begin? And we begin with working together and understanding that there's a brutality and there are consequences. Once you begin to train yourself in this, I mean, it is a little bit of no going back. I mean, you're damaging yourself when you're thinking about every single move that you do to inflict pain on somebody else. So we began to work with yoga instructors, meditation people to figure out how the hell do we come back from this kind of training. We had this one Marine who was really one of the toughest people I met, but he talked about how he got in a fight in a movie theater because someone wouldn't put away their cell phone. And then he went back to his girlfriend and she'd left. And it was the saddest story. It was like these people are trained to act a certain way and they can't turn it off. And we were trying to figure out, how do we begin to turn it off? How can we?
Warrior stance! Warrior climb! Ready! Strike! 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 Hammer fist! Kill! Hammer fist! Kill! Hammer fist! Kill! Stop! Stop! Bunt, jab, jab, bunt, jab, jab.
The movies? I'd rather be the fool. Let's say.
Yeah, that's intense. Even now I show it. I'm like, I mean, I'm thinking you probably haven't been to Chicago, and maybe you've heard about all the craziness in the press, which isn't really all true. But preparing the body for struggle using these tactics seem to be actually a legitimate way of dealing within our minds and also empowering ourselves in the moment. So how do we respond to an oppressive, violent world? Well, we almost need to muscle up. We need to prepare ourselves for the inevitable. But that's not the only way that I'm thinking of interpreting the past. This is Float. This actually happened in the same year because all of these pieces related to violence that was happening in 1919. Float was a peaceful meditation on Lake Michigan near Chicago, in which a young boy, a young black boy, was killed in 1919 when his raft drifted to a white beach. Eugene Williams, age 17, was stoned to death and killed by drowning in a lake, which unleashed 5 days of violence and unrest called the Chicago Riot, which is not a proper term. It's an uprising. 100 years later, my team created a living monument of interlocked interracial groups now floating together in the lake, a sign of progress, a projection of the future, perhaps more of a reflection of ills of the past. You know, in Lake Michigan, you're not allowed to take flotational devices and put it in the water because of many reasons, one of which that you drift away really quickly. You can find yourself in the next state within an hour if you're not careful. But the idea of us holding together and keeping this tight group, meanwhile there's other people doing other things. We were performing this piece in the lake, 100 bodies, 100 years to the exact minute, to the moment. So, I mean, it's a reflection of possibly what has changed. I think maybe that's an optimistic way of looking at it, but things have changed. This is the last video piece, performance, that I'm going to talk about, and is titled Elaine. And these are dark histories. I know I'm taking you to dark places, but I think we have to go there. This was all about finding mass graves. Walking slowly across a cotton field in Elaine, Arkansas, the site of an unmarked mound in this field under a rusty water tower, which you don't see, is a mass grave of an unknown numbers of bodies. And when I say it's an unmarked mound, is you wouldn't know that there are bodies there. There's nothing that mentions that people were buried here. And mass graves may disappear from records, but they are chiseled into memories. Sandra Dolly Avery, an Elaine native, was around 25 years old in the 1980s when she asked our neighbor who was sitting on a porch, she was marveling at the colorful masses of blooming flowers that grew everywhere in her yard, except in one corner. Avery asked the woman, who was about 90 years old, "Why don't you have any flowers over there?" "Flowers don't grow on graves," she said. people are buried all over there, and they're buried everywhere in which we live. Finding the mass graves would force Arkansas to confront the dark secret of the massacre. Even on the 100th anniversary of the violence, the tragedy is so buried, it's so deep, and there's still so much fear that it barely registers in American history. Very few people know about it. They have little awareness of this, even though people have spent their whole lives in a lane. Only a select population know about the massacre. The most frequently touted number is 237, but some observers say the number could be more than 800, which would make it the deadliest massacre of African Americans in U.S. history. And there in this cotton field is a mound where nobody plants anything. In this place, I visit the souls that inhabit the mound. In the simple action of moving until I disappear, this becomes the journey. My heart races as I approach the mound, but as I return, I'm carrying the weight of the massacre. In my body, I feel it. I'm not the kind of person that would probably have these kind of spiritual feelings, so when I had them, it caught me off guard, and it's part of the reason I'm talking about it today. In the conclusion of this piece, I am the vehicle. I'm returning with the ghost of this exploration. So this is a frame from Kindred, the graphic novel, in which the protagonist says, "I lost my arm on my last trip home." And one of the reasons I loved this book, and one of the reasons I loved Kindred, is because people don't travel time without there being a consequence. It's hard to end this lecture and not talk about the cost of these things. I mean, at the beginning, I'm talking about it very light, but now it's, after, taking this journey with me, you begin to understand some of the relevance. I consider myself to have a light personality outside of my work. I exercise, I meditate, I do yoga when I can, but I think this is dirty business. I think about the other artists that have worked this way and how it's worn on their bodies. I began to think about this, and I'm not the same. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, pre-diabetes. My doctor says it's genetic, but what the hell does that mean? Amazing performance artist, time agent, William Popel. I just thought it was important to mention him. He died last year. He died prematurely, 68 years old. And I begin to think, the cause of death isn't clear, but I know and I can feel that he passed away too soon. Actually, I could even say similar about other time agents, maybe Chris Burden. But in conclusion, I think about these things a lot. And as you pack your bags, as you prepare for your own personal journeys home, are you ready to leap into different time zones yourself? I hope you can think about your role in moving into space and thinking about the moments in which you can stop looking for the empirical evidence, to stop looking for the factual evidence. Support your ideas, but I think also use your heart and use your spirit and ruminate on the power that you have to make these journeys yourself, to be a part of a movement to change history. I hate to admit it, but this is probably one of the most empowered groups I've ever spoke in front of. You are empowered to travel time, to alter history in your own way. This precious materiality that we've been talking about all week, it includes you. Yes, it includes you right now in this space. What are you doing about it? What is your agency? Are you locked in the past? Or are you coming to terms of the injustices that have empowered us to be in this position right now? So when you're boarding your planes and you're moving forward and back into time, experiencing your own pain of jet lag, I hope you've gathered enough information to begin to think about change and understand that you too are creative. Yes, you are creative. I mean, I can't stand it when art historians say, I'm not creative. Yes, you are. You have a responsibility, just like I do, to nurture and tend to the future. Thank you very much.